there's not a lot to say at the moment, other than I think this is a time of everyone coming together rather than apart, but I guess we'll see about that. I don't want to put politics on the channel. So as always, I'm the Standard, this is the Geek In Review, and let's get to it. So after what can only be described as a divisive episode last week, the show is back in full swing. We pick up pretty much where we left off last week, where Osira has taken Discovery and used the old Trojan horse manoeuvre to get into Starfleet HQ. And honestly myself, I'm kind of surprised it worked. But before she gets the ship into the base, Michael and Book jump out of a transwarp corridor and crash into the Discovery shuttle bay, which, you know, explains why it's always been open since season 1. It took a while, but that's one plot point they've closed, I guess, at least this season. Who knows about the burn? I don't. I did say on Twitter I thought this would be a die-hard episode, and I wasn't wrong. We've got neck snapping, shootouts, and Michael even yells yippee-ki-yay. Oh no, she doesn't do that, but she does lose her shoes, so it is very appropriately themed for the time of the year that it's showing. But this episode has got a lot more politics than action, and we finally get a sense of where Starfleet sits in the grand scheme of the galaxy. Once she gets into the headquarters, Osira, when you think about it, is actually pretty reasonable. Like, surprisingly reasonable. No conflict or death threats, she's just got more of a proposal for Vance and Starfleet. And it turns out that the Emerald Chains are less Pirates of the Caribbean and more maybe, I don't know, the USSR? But there's a lot more before we get to that. Remember last week when Osira and Tilly spoke and Osira kind of stripped her down during that conversation? Well, it turns out the reason that she knew so much is she'd been talking to Zara. You know that guy from episode 2? You remember him? He was a bit of a prick. Yeah, he's back. Personally, I thought it was going to be that she'd found Lieutenant Nan floating in space as she'd been tracking Discovery, but I guess not. I do hope we get to see Nan again, and I certainly hope that they don't try and write Saru out in the same way and just leaving him on a ship with his people, because man oh man, that'd be a sucker punch. After they get on board the ship, Michael wants to find Stamets, as she knows he's the only person who can jump the ship and use it successfully. Book gives her a device to hide her life signs while he gets caught to let her slip away. So Mike's out there, John McClaning the shit out of the situation, she's choking guys out, getting stabbed, stealing comm devices, phasering her own wounds, all that good stuff. She manages to send a message to her mum, which I hope they don't bring in the Navarre to save the day like they did with Starfleet at the end of Picard, but again, I guess we're going to have to see. This season, or this show, certainly does love to do nods, and sometimes it can be a little heavy-handed, and sometimes they don't add to anything at all, but again, we're going to have to wait and see. While all this is going on, there's a standoff between Vance and Osira when he realises that she has control of the ship. And this isn't the standoff that we thought we were going to get by any mile. One thing Osira asks, which a few of us asked, is where is the Federation President? I mean, where is this person we've had the Federation referred to but we've not been asked, or we've not seen the President or any council members or cabinet members or members of Parliament or whatever you want to call it? Personally, I think that the President could be Kovacs, the guy in the suit, David Cronenberg, that we've seen. The reason for this is he doesn't give anything away at all. We've not seen him interact with Vance, so we don't know what the command structure or relationship is like with them, and also he's wearing a suit, not a uniform. That seems a lot more civilian to me. The other person I think it could be the President is, well, not Adira, but the Trill that was inside her, Tal. Because we know that Tal was a senior member of Starfleet, but we don't know anything else, and this has kind of been underplayed. When Vance first met Adira, he said to her that we're not going to have the same relationship that I had with Senna. Now, we just assumed that this was maybe friendship, but it could be more. Maybe Senna Tal was higher up than we thought, but again, we're probably not going to get an answer this season, but hopefully we will. I think we are going to get a cliffhanger. And while all this is going on, the bridge crew managed to overpower the guards, because, you know, they're aces at teamwork. But where the hell is Nielsen? She's been standing about the bridge all season and she's nowhere to be seen when the action kicks off in this episode, but that's beside the point. Osira boards onto Federation headquarters, and Vance uses the same holo he did when they were interviewing the Discovery crew to make sure that she's true. She does bring up some great points, however, how the galaxy changes and that no one is what they once were, and although the Federation is now a lot weaker than they were, they're still considered a symbol of hope, and that's something that no matter how big the Emerald Chain gets, it can't have. So she wants to join them, at least together in some sort of formal alliance, or at least end the conflict. Plus they have a spore drive, and it turns out Chain is more of a union than a gang than we'd thought. They want to pull the resources of both organisations together, And ultimately what it comes down to is they both want to do what's best for their people, and at this point the Hall confirms that she isn't lying, and when you think about it, this does make sense. It seems that the conflict between the Chain and Starfleet never really ends with a decisive victory. There's never been a battle where one's dominated the other. It's always a standoff or a negotiation, so she seems to be sick of this and she wants to bring the two organisations together. In fact, she's so about science that she brings her own creepy scientist on board, played by the awesome Kenneth Mitchell, who you might not recognise his face, but this is his 4th appearance in Star Trek. Played 3 other Klingons going back to season 1. Look it up, you probably know already, but he's an absolutely fantastic actor and it's great to see him for once in his own skin. At first you think he's going to be this evil sort of Nazi scientist vibe, but that's what this episode does, is it subverts your expectations. It turns out this guy just wants to do as much good as Starfleet does, and he's just on the other side of the coin. He releases Stamets from the mind control device from the end of the last episode, and Stamets basically tells him, look, you can't recreate what made me, it was a one-off, it was from an organism that no longer exists or one that we can't find. You might be able to, but if you try to do it, you'd probably have to kill me, and that's a risk that you wouldn't want to take, because then this spore drive's going to be redundant. And then Aurelio the scientist does something that I'm surprised doesn't happen more often this season. He has to remind Stamets that this is the future now, so that they can actually replicate the tech without killing him. And why doesn't this pop up more often? These characters that have jumped almost 1,000 years should have huge gaps in their knowledge, but they don't. There's no one there to correct them. When they arrived at Starfleet HQ back in episode 2, I did think they were going to crew up the Discovery with some modern Starfleet members to keep them in check and sort of bring them up to date. That would make common sense, but it never happened. The Vance-Osira negotiation does take a bit of a turn, as Vance wants a representative from the Chain that he knows isn't going to be her puppet. She says this won't be a problem and this is the only time that she's caught lying. She also seems to be doing a lot of appeasing of Starfleet. She wants to ban slavery, the exploitation of pre-warp races. She prevents Vance with a pretty solid armistice for both sides, which is pretty reasonable. But the thing that lets this down, for me at least, is Vance wants her to stand trial for the crimes that she's committed as some sort of symbol, when they're both not in great circumstances. They're both thinking of their people, and Vance is hinging the continuation of 2 organisations, you could even say civilisations, on this one thing. It's a lot to put on the table, but back on Discovery, Michael breaks Stamets out and forces him to leave the ship in order to prevent Osira from manipulating the spore drive. And this was easily one of the best scenes of the series, not just the episode. When we first met Stamets back in season 1, he was a bit of a prick and a bit direct, and I absolutely loved him. I don't like the fact that they've softened this character up. I always like the idea that there's a guy on there that you need in the crew, and he's just not the nicest person to approach or get on with. He's not necessarily nasty, he's just not someone you want to be stuck in a turbo lift with at the end of the day. And Stamets, trying to defend himself even though Michael's trying to save his life, calls her on everything that she's done from season 2 up until now, and reminds her of the fact that everyone jumped into the future for her, to help her, and that she is just betraying him and his family because Adira and Hugh are stuck in the nebula with Saru, and he thinks that he's not going to get them back. Now, going forward, this does raise an interesting question. If they don't resolve this conflict and the crew do get brought back together, and Stamets still feels this way about Mike, I can see him asking for Saru or Vance to reassign her. He knows that he's the power because they need him to jump the ship. And what do they need her for? I mean, to always be right. I don't think, and I'm not saying that they're going to write Michael out, but I'm just saying she could go on a side quest for a few episodes and we'll get her back. But this does create a very interesting dynamic. But again, it is Discovery, and it does love resolving personal conflict, so I assume that they will all be pals at some point, but I think they will carry this over into season 4, hopefully. Now, we don't get any mention of the burn and rarely any mention of Saru and Hugh this week, which was a bit of a letdown because we've got 1 episode left. I do think that the final episode is going to end on a cliffhanger, a sort of best of both worlds scenario, but I'll talk about that later on. But as always, these are just my thoughts. Let me know what you think in the comments below, or on Twitter. You can find me at The Geeks Reviews. I wish you all a happy new year, and again, take care of yourself guys, wherever you are. I'm The Standard, and this has been The Geek in Review.